Well, hello everyone. I am back today to talk about another new release film. And the beginning of the year is always a rough start for movies. Luckily, we have Dune Part 2, which was supposed to release last year. And we've had some carryover films from festival seasons from 2023 that have been really excellent. But the new release slotted films for 2024 have been pretty rough thus far. I really enjoyed Drive Away Dolls and, like I said, Dune Part 2. But aside from that, I haven't seen much greatness this year yet. And in the horror space, especially, this year has been rough. I reviewed Night Swim, which I found some comedic bits in it to be really entertaining, like so bad it's good entertaining, but the movie was not good. And then Founders Day, which was an absolutely miserable mess. One of the worst films I've sat through all year. And this is from Blumhouse. And if you have been following me on YouTube for a while, I've discussed Blumhouse in great detail. I give Jason Blum a lot of respect because he always produces these horror films that cost virtually no money. They're almost always PG-13, and they bring Blumhouse in a ton of money. And every now and again, he'll release a sleeper hit, something like Insidious, and then you get terrible movies like Truth or Dare, and the production company is just a hot mess. You get greatness, and then you get terrible movies. There's never any consistency. And I'll be honest, I saw the trailer for this movie, and I was like, this is either gonna really surprise me and be something super entertaining, and I liked the way the trailer was cut. I thought there was some potential, or this will be absolute garbage. And I was just gonna go into it blind and hope that it was gonna be something entertaining. And the movie I'm gonna be talking about with you today is Imaginary. Imaginary is directed by Jeff Wadlow. When Jessica moves back into her childhood home with her family, her youngest stepdaughter, Alice, develops an eerie attachment to a stuffed bear named Chauncey she finds in the basement. Alice begins playing games with Chauncey that begin playful and become increasingly sinister. As Alice's behavior becomes more and more concerning, Jessica intervenes only to realize Chauncey is much more than a stuffed toy bear she believes him to be. So, as I said, I went into this movie with relatively low expectations, but hoping maybe Blumhouse would put out a sleeper hit or something that was so bad it's good that I would enjoy watching. And that was definitely not this. This movie is a steaming pile of shit. It is horrible. It is up there with Founders Day as one of the worst films I've watched this year thus far. And the reason for that is this movie is incredibly lazy. It feels like a copycat of 1,000 different movies. The performances in this thing are laughable, like some of the worst I've seen all year long. Pacing is really terrible. This thing is like an hour and 40 minutes, and it feels like you're just watching it for an eternity. And I'll break it down in total for you when I discuss the film as a whole. So at the beginning of the film, we are introduced to Jessica, who is living with her husband Max and her stepdaughters Taylor and Alice, and they're moving from an apartment back into Jessica's childhood home. And she wants to go back to her childhood home because she has a lot of good memories from there, and her husband constantly says that that is her happy place. And she writes children's books, and she's been having these nightmares and has really been struggling to keep in a creative headspace. And so they decide to move back into her childhood home. Well, as they're moving into the house, Alice goes into the basement, and a door opens up in the basement and finds a stuffed teddy bear who tells her his name is Chauncey. And the two of them start spending time together, and the family just thinks that it's cute that she has an imaginary friend. And she starts going around with this checklist that is a scavenger hunt that Chauncey told her she needs to find these different things. She needs to find these different things, and the family thinks that it's adorable. And so she starts going out. She has to get like a lock of hair and like a happy memory and all of these different things. And slowly but surely, her list becomes more and more sinister to where it gets to a point that she's supposed to self-harm. And the family starts to worry about it. Things get progressively more eerie and strange. And the entirety of the film is Jessica is trying to figure out what Chauncey is and what Chauncey wants with her stepdaughter. So as I said, I thought this movie was horrible, and there's a multitude of reasons why this movie is horrible, but I will start off by saying it is really funny to me. This movie feels like a ripoff of Insidious, which the fact that it's from Blumhouse is pretty hilarious, where you have a young kid that has an imaginary friend. The family's like, oh, what's going on? And then horrible things start happening to the kid. and then you get transported into a magical realm, different universe that the parents have to try to track the kid down in. And that is literally beat by beat what this movie is. And I find it so funny that Blumhouse has this idea about imaginary friends, and they're like, hey, we'll take premise for a movie that we've already made that was incredibly successful and just try to do it again, but with a little bit of tweaking to it, so it's not exactly the same. And that irritated me the entire time I was watching the movie, because I'm a huge fan of Insidious. It's one of my favorite PG-13 horror movies, and it was just such a blatant ripoff in a way that was really irritating. The performances in this movie are horrible. Everyone in this film feels like they're reading off of a piece of paper. There was certain line delivery in this movie that made me crack up laughing, and it wasn't in like a so bad it's good way. It was just in a it's really bad way. Like a lot of actors that just have not had a lot of screen time or haven't had a lot of practice to perfect their craft. And so because of that, it just was really hilarious in moments. It felt like a horror movie that would air on like Lifetime or like the Sci-Fi Channel, or a place that has virtually no budget, and that they're just picking random actors off the street and saying, go for it. I will say the actress that plays Jessica does a decent job in moments. They try to create this like familial trauma, and that her and the young girl are bonding because of their shared trauma. But every time that came up, it felt so forced, and I cannot stand forced sentimentality. I like when emotion in movies feels very natural, and it doesn't feel like a manipulation technique to try to hold your interest. Like if you're going to make it a part of the movie, make it a more important part of the movie, instead of just being like, we might be losing their attention. Let's throw something extreme in here so hopefully they'll feel something. And that was really annoying to me. Aside from that, the horror elements in this are non-existent. They are virtually every cliche that you've seen in a horror movie. The jump scares are really bad. The CGI in this movie is abysmal. In about the first 5 minutes, there's this CGI creature, and I was like, oh my god, is this what we're in for the rest of the movie? And luckily, towards the third act, there's some practical effects thrown in. They're not necessarily great, but I would rather see someone take a risk with practical effects than really terrible CGI. And that was another huge issue that I had with this movie. And the plot beats were so formulaic. I said this in my Letterboxd review, but it was really hilarious. My brother looked at me in the first 5 minutes of this movie and said, there will be a character that comes into this film and says, do you know that imaginary friends have existed for thousands of years, and go through the history of imaginary friends? And me being a movie guy, I'm like, yeah, there's a shot that that's going to happen in this movie, because it's pretty typical to happen in a horror film. But for some reason, as soon as it happened, because he said that, I laughed so hard I cried. And that was the most entertaining part of the entire movie, was that this was so formulaic that he was able to look at me and say, this is exactly what's going to happen. And it really is that. Like, if you can think of what a majority of horror movies have been the past 20 years that are like mass marketed horror films by Blumhouse or some of the bigger horror production companies, just beat by beat by beat, there is no change in the story. Because the performances are so bad, it makes it really difficult to sit through. And the characters' motivations, especially one of the characters' motivations that involves one of the twists in the movie, don't make a hell of a lot of sense. And when it happens, you're just kind of scratching your head. And the performance from that character in particular is awful, just like one of the worst I've seen all year long, that it's hard to stay invested whatsoever. The one thing I will give this film is there is some creativity in the premise. I really like some of the stuff when it comes to like the imaginary friends world. I think there's some creativity involved and coming up with that concept. But aside from that, the rest of the movie is a dumpster fire, and I was completely ready for it to be over. They do this thing where they try to hit a comedic punch in the third act, and you are just so irritated by what you've sat through that it is just miserable. And it makes you mad by the time that it shows up. And yeah, I don't really have anything positive to say. This will easily go on one of my worst films of the year. I wouldn't even tell you to go watch this as like a so bad it's good entertaining movie, because there aren't enough so bad it's good moments for it to work. The horror is so cliche. There's nothing scary in this movie. And I just really need to quit watching Blumhouse movies because they're typically really bad. So if you've seen Imaginary, did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was a dumpster fire. It was absolutely horrible, and I feel like I wasted an hour and 40 minutes of my life. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.